Okay, so let's call the meeting to order. I chair the virtual board of boiler meeting of December 2020 to order at 9:30 a.m. Debbie, at this time, could you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Chairman Chris Beyer.
Present.
Blake Alexander is excused. Thomas Engstrom. Okay, he most likely is having some connection problems. I will call his name back in a second. And one of our new members, Ryan Gavry.
It's Ryan Garvey.
Garvey?
Yeah. Thank
Garvey.
you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Roger Hendricks.
Present.
Patrick Lamb.
Present.
Greg Moyer. And Greg Moyer did say he's going to be entering a little late to the meeting this morning, so we'll come back to him. And Mr. Chair, when he does sign in, let's note his time of arrival. Okay. And then we also have another new member, Jeffrey
Roder, present.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
This is Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Great.
This is new to me. I'm struggling.
I think you're doing great. Thank you, Tom. It's new to all of us. Okay, Mr. Chair, you can go on with your meeting.
Okay, at this time, does anybody have any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I, Chris Beyer, roll the agenda of order of business approved. Okay, so the approval of the board draft meeting minutes from September 1st, 2020. I, Chair Chris Beyer, roll the draft minutes of September 1st, 2020 final. The date of our next meeting is March 2nd, 2021. If anybody wants to review, there's a calendar included in the packet for the 2021 meeting dates. I guess we're going to say farewell to Kenneth Hill. Tom Clark has something he wants to say about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, this is Tom Clark, the Chief Boiler Inspector with Building Codes Division. So unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to Ken Hill today. We have a little statement prepared I'd like to read. Just a little background on Ken. He was confirmed to the Board of Boiler Rules on October 1st, 2010, over 10 years ago. And he was appointed to the position he has filled until today, which is, and this is the full official title, the position of owner and user or representative and employee of owner and user of a pressure vessel in Oregon and who has had practical experience with pressure vessels. So I hope for the sake of your business cards, that's the longest title you've ever held, Ken.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Hill has worked for International Paper in Springfield as a manager of maintenance and engineering since January of 2010. Until today. Mr. Hill began his career at the age of 18 working in a steel mill for the Babcock and Wilcox Company, which at the time was perhaps the largest maker of boiler tubes in the United States, if not the world. The Babcock and Wilcox Company is something of an institution in the boiler industry. They've been manufacturing, building, and starting up boilers since 1869. That predates the ASME code, that predates the National Board Inspection Code, and predates the Oregon Building Codes. So quite a lot of history there. Mr. Hill somehow found time while working for them to get a degree in mechanical engineering from West Virginia University. And then he continued to work for Babcock and Wilcox until he took a position with Laminate Industries as a boiler engineer. And then he spent some time at Weyerhaeuser before settling down at International Paper in Springfield. When Mr. Hill applied to join the Board of Boiler Rules, he said that during his 30-plus years of experience in the boiler industry, he developed a deep understanding of what can happen when a boiler equipment fails. And his interest in participating with the board was to ensure that the means were in place to ensure public safety and that undue obstacles were not created to limit the ability for a business to achieve success. The board and the division both have valued Mr. Hill's time, and we appreciate his appointment and his input, and he will be missed. And Ken, personally, I just want to say I know I've only served as a technical advisor to this board for about 1.5 years, but the time I've spent working with you has been great. I've appreciated your input, especially recently with some issues that are kind of near and dear to you with the paper and pulp industry. And so thank you for your help with all of that, and good luck to you on whatever's next.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. I've enjoyed my time on the board. I've learned a lot on the public sector and government works that I didn't really understand before this assignment. So I've definitely enjoyed my time, and hard to believe it's been over 40 years since I made my first boiler too, but really enjoyed it. And I'll be retiring here in another year or so. So I don't know if we'll be seeing a whole lot of boilers after that, but you never know. Give me a call if you ever need any advice. I'll be around.
Thanks, Ken.
Very good. Thanks, Ken. So at this time, I'd like to welcome 2 new members to the board. First, we have Joseph Ryan Garvey. He was appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to the public member position of the Board of Boiler Rolls for his first term beginning October 1st, 2020. Mr. Garvey, if you'd like to take a second to introduce yourself, that'd be awesome.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I've worked around boilers for quite a while, and I'm interested in doing what I can to help this board. Although public member is a pretty low title, I respect all you guys. I just want you to know that hopefully I can be a welcomed addition. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome to the board. Our next new member is Jeffrey Rotert. He was appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate to the user of a pressure vessel position on the Board of Boiler Rolls for his first term beginning October 1st, 2020. Mr. If you'd take a second to say hi.
Yes, good morning. I work for CB Richard Ellis, currently on the OHSU South Waterfront account. I'm primarily responsible for day-to-day boiler operations and maintenance, as well as the hydronics. After the first of the year, I'll be moving over to the Nike account, and looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the board. Okay, moving on, we're going to go into an executive session. So I have a script to read to you. The Board of Boiler Rolls will now meet in executive session at 9:39 a.m. The executive session will be held pursuant to ORS 192.6602F for the session, which allows the board to meet in executive session to consider information or records that are exempt from disclosure by law, including written advice from board counsel. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to disconnect from the audio conference board meeting. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about the subject during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of this executive session, the board will return to open session and welcome members, staff, and the public to join the meeting through GoToMeeting for the rest of the board agenda. So, Debbie, can you make sure all the audio recordings are switched over to the executive session?
Okay, everybody go ahead and disconnect and sign in with your executive session numbers. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, if you're ready to do roll call, I'll make sure all members are joined.
That would be great. Let's rejoin the public meeting at 10:15 a.m.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do roll call. Chair
Thank you.
Fire
Present.
and Blake Alexander is excused. Thomas Ingstrom.
Present.
Thank you. Ryan Garvey.
Present.
Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Roger Hendricks.
Present.
Patrick Lamb.
Present.
Has Gregory Moyer signed in yet? I do not see him. Okay, Jeffrey Rodert.
Present.
Mr. Chair, we do have our quorum. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay, moving along, we're going to go into the public comment section. Tyler, do you have any public comments to address?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Good morning. My name is Tyler Glaze, policy analyst for the division. This is our public comment section, so I'm going to address everyone who's called in, and also Ms. VanNatta, who I know is here from the Northwest Pulp and Paper Association. If there is anyone here for public comment, could you please state your name and who you're representing, and then we will call you one by one to speak. So I know Ms. VanNatta, you are already here. Is there anyone else here for public comment?
Rob Macdonald, Cascade Pacific Pulp.
Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Chair, I believe we should proceed with Ms. VanNatta first.
That sounds great.
Shall I begin, gentlemen?
Yes, please.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Kathryn VanNatta with the Northwest Pulp and Paper Association. I am the Director of Regulatory and Government Affairs located at 2191 Southeast Oak Crest Drive, Hillsboro, Oregon, 97123. NWPPA is a 64-year-old trade association that represents pulp and paper for our forest products facilities on regulatory, legal, and government affairs aspects of environmental and energy issues related to mill operations. I have been an NWPPA employee for the last 25 years and have represented NWPPA members before the Boiler Board on other issues. NWPPA represents pulp and paper and other forest products companies who own and operate boilers who are regulated by the recent temporary rule, Oregon Administrative Rule 918-225-0590. NWPPA participated in that rulemaking. We provided verbal comment during the public hearing, written comment, and also commented to the Boiler Board at their last quarterly board meeting. NWPPA raised concerns with the rule during our previous testimony and comment. Our concerns still exist. We're concerned with the limitations in the rule and how they affect our current business model and practices. Therefore, we would like to be involved as that temporary rule becomes permanent we would like to be part of the work to modify the rule so it works for everyone during this trying time. And we realize why the rule was put together. But like I said, for our large operating boilers, it does not allow our current business practices to operate with a sense of certainty, and we need to plan our 2021 operations now. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thanks, Ms. VanNatta. Were there any other public comments, Tyler?
Yes, Mr. Macdonald?
Okay. I am Rob Macdonald. I am the engineering manager at Cascade Pacific Pulp. We are a pulp producer. We operate a recovery boiler. Our operations is 24/7. For the last 9 cycles of maintenance, we have worked with our insurance provider and with, at that time, different chief inspectors with the boiler board to request extensions for 6-month extensions for an 18-month duration for the operation of our recovery boiler. We have demonstrated through the history of safe operation, meeting our insurance carriers' requirements and our own operation, that this practice has worked well. And for our viability, it's important that we're able to operate on an 18-month cycle. The proposed ruling as it stands now with 1 extension in every 4 years is a hindrance to what we have done in the past and for our operations. So we too would like to participate in the modification of the final ruling so we can come up with requirements that assure the safe operation of boilers, but also allows us to operate successfully. That's all I got.
Thanks, Mr. McDonald. Do we have any other public comments? What's that?
Chair, I believe that's everyone.
Okay, thank you. So let's move into the report section and just let's do a little discussion on the extension of the boiler vessel inspection cycle. Chief Clark, since you're the resident expert on this subject, would you help lead us off?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is Tom Clark, Chief Boiler Inspector with the division. So we've discussed this issue in the last board meeting a little bit. You as a group decided that you wanted to further address the needs of the paper and pulp industry. I don't believe you really came to any consensus on how you wanted to do that, but you wanted to continue the discussion. So your options moving forward are you can continue to discuss it as a group in these quarterly board meetings and work to come to a decision that way, or through the division, you can work to appoint a task group or committee that can take the time to review the situation in a more focused setting and maybe with a little more time available to address that. Such a group would then report back to the board with their findings, and the boiler board would still make a final decision. But how you want to approach that moving forward is kind of up to the group.
Mr. Clark, that would be my gut instinct is let's consider forming a special committee and get everybody involved and all the public people that want to be involved and iron this out so it works for everybody. And does anybody have anything to say about that?
Through the chair, this is Roger Hendricks. I agree with Tom and Chris on this matter that a task group would make sense. It would give, like Tom said, a more opportunity to have a focused discussion on the topic and come to a consensus on what's going to work for everybody. Obviously, these rules are in place and have been in place for however many, decades. So there's obviously a reason that these were set up in this manner for this inspection cycle. So I think if it's going to change the rules permanently, it's definitely worth taking this into a more focused discussion.
Thanks, Roger. Anybody else like to weigh in on this? Okay, so Tyler, any idea how we start a task group?
Mr. Chair, I believe the discussion that we've already had is enough for us, for our purposes, and I believe BCD will get the ball rolling, and we will we'll be in contact with the members of the board and members of the public as we move forward.
Okay.
Through the chair, this is Roger Hendricks again. I'm sorry. The one thing that came to mind just briefly is I think it's very critical to have some of the insurance inspectors involved with this discussion as industry experts because they do this all day, every day. And some of us are just here for our expertise in individual fields.
Well, through the chair, this is Tom Clark, Boiler Chief again. My understanding is that while the division will be able to open up solicitation for membership, that if the board wants to appoint members to that group, that's also an option.
Excellent. Do we have to do it in a formal setting as in the meeting, or can we just reach out to the division?
Mr. Chair, I'm not certain of the answer to your question, but I believe you would probably need to do it if you were appointing members. I believe you would probably need to do it in a noticed meeting, but I'm not certain of that.
Well, with that being said, does anybody involved here today like to volunteer to be on the task group?
I'm willing to volunteer.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to speak out of order if you're actually asking for the public, but I am definitely interested in participating if that opportunity is available.
Thank you for your help.
This is Kathryn VanNatta. I think I'm muted, but I would like to volunteer the association and to coordinate with our members if possible.
Thanks, Ms. VanNatta.
Thank you.
All right, does anybody else have any further discussion on this topic? Hearing none, we'll move on. Next thing, board discussion on 2021 code adoption. Can I have Chief Clark address this item, please?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So next year is our year for code adoption. Normally we do this every 3 years, and so it's that time again. This will be my first code adoption, and I think it may be the first code adoption for a number of our board members. So we'll get to learn this process together. That should be fun. Just a general timeline of how things are going to go. Today, we're kicking off the discussion of code adoption. Over the next few months, we would need to solicit membership for a committee to review code adoption. We would need to be ready to announce those committee members at your next meeting, which is March 2nd. So we need to get the ball rolling on that. Then throughout April and May, we'll have committee meetings where we review the proposed codes to be adopted, all the changes that have been made to those codes since the previous version that we have adopted. And we would prepare all those documents for the main boiler board to review. Then on June 1st, your second meeting of next year, that committee would have documentation ready for the whole board to review, and you would make a decision based on their recommendations as to which codes you want to adopt. Then we would move it forward at the division for a public rulemaking hearing. We would hold that hearing similarly to how we did with the previously adopted rule. So I think we're familiar with that process at this point. Then in September, we would have another board meeting where we would review any necessary changes or any tweaks we'd want to make to what we adopt and what we don't adopt. And then we would file for permanent rule, and the new codes would be effective October 1st. So one really important thing this year is that timing is finally lined up that we could adopt the 2021 codes in 2021, which I don't think has happened for many years that we've ever been up to date on our codes. So this is a great opportunity for us to really get ahead and keep up with the industry, because a lot of manufacturers and installing contractors in the state are operating on the latest code editions, and often the edition we've adopted is a few years behind. Case in point, we're currently on the 2017 National Board Inspection Code. 2019 had been issued since then, and starting next year, we'll be 4 years behind. So it'll be great to make that happen. So that's the general process. If any board members are interested in participating, we of course welcome that, and then we can also open up membership to the code committee to public members as well. But we'll need to get started on that very soon. So do we have any questions on that process, Mr. Chair?
I do not. Thank you. Mr. Clark, would you like to go right into your boiler program update?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll continue on from there. So for program updates, we'll start with the usual overdue stat review. It looks like numbers are continuing to trend upwards, kind of as we expected with the pandemic. The state is currently at 18% overdue as of the end of November. That's up from 17% the previous month. The insurance inspection agencies are averaging about 21%, which is actually down 1% from 22% the previous month. This is what we expected. Not only have we been dealing with a pandemic, but we dealt with forest fires, and at the state we've dealt with a vacancy for the last 3.5 months. So not surprised that numbers are trending upwards. You know, until we start seeing vaccines and other things, I'm not sure we're really going to see the numbers trend that much downwards until things really start to clear up. We've had a lot of issues with access to facilities. We've had a lot of facilities that are either shut down or in kind of a standby state. just due to the restrictions the state has been facing during the pandemic. So those numbers will probably either trend up or hold steady for the foreseeable future. The next thing I'd like to discuss, unfortunately, is not good news. I have 2 accidents to report. The first, luckily, barely qualifies as an accident. We had an issue in a school where a cast iron sectional low pressure steam boiler was being fed by a local water source, a reservoir. That water was treated at the source and softened again at the boiler itself. But unfortunately, as some of you may know, water softening really doesn't take stuff out of the water, it just changes what's in there. So the equipment operator in question wasn't really following standard procedure in blowing down their equipment before and during use. So quite a bit of sediment deposits built up in the low water cutout float chamber for the boiler, and it built up to the point where that device was no longer functional and the boiler boiled itself dry, because without the float operating, the fill pump never got a signal to turn on. So the boiler boiled dry, continued to fire, and all that heat burned out the gaskets between the sections of the boiler, causing a lot of smoke to fill the room and giving a signal to the operators that there was a problem. So no real property damage occurred. There were no injuries. Luckily, it was just limited to minor equipment damage to the boiler itself. But we performed a full investigation as we normally do. Especially being at a school, we took it very seriously. But it was a pretty straightforward lesson learned that water treatment and routine maintenance operations really need to be taken seriously. The customer was educated on that. They were directed to work with a water treatment company to put together a better plan for future operations. Unfortunately, the second accident I have to report was a bit more serious, and also, unfortunately, we didn't find out about it until about 6 months after the fact. It happened back in March, early April timeline. A facility in Oregon that performs cannabis oil extraction had a high-pressure CO2 extraction unit set up in their facility. Involved multiple pressure vessels and pressure piping connecting all those vessels. They use the high-pressure CO2 to force the oil out of the organic product. And all the vessels were ASME rated. They had been permitted upon installation. Our inspector had been there and inspected the equipment, found everything satisfactory. I think that was on a Friday. And then over the weekend, the owner did a few test runs, dry runs without any product, pressurized the system, ran it through the cycles. Everything seemed to work fine. Then that following Monday, they went to do their first operational run. They had the equipment manufacturer there on site to try and do some training with the group. They were standing, the installation company owner and one of the equipment owner representatives were both standing right next to the equipment when, during a change of pressure during the procedure, where they kind of move the product from one vessel to another. So they open up a solenoid valve and rapidly the pressure moves from one vessel to another via pipe. Well, as they did that, pipe fitting failed. And those two people happened to be standing right next to the pipe whose fitting failed. The pipe came loose and broke free. It connected with the forehead of one of the two people standing there and glanced across the side of the other. The person who got glanced across the side of the head had 96 stitches, and the person who got hit in the forehead, unfortunately, went into a coma, suffered severe head trauma, and 6 months later is still in the hospital recovering. They're not sure that person will ever be quite the same as they were. So a really, really tragic accident. And Once we found out about the situation, we performed a full investigation, as we do, and we reviewed the owner user's own accident report, as well as some documentation provided to us by Oregon OSHA. And after reviewing that and inspecting the equipment, we found that, unfortunately, this was one of those situations where they didn't really do anything wrong. It's just a freak accident. The fitting just failed. They have an engineering firm looking into exactly why the fitting failed and why it didn't fail on the previous pressurizations. But there's no one operational practice I can point to that could explain why this happened. They did everything right. The company did some great follow-up actions. They installed some brackets all around the piping so that if any of it came loose, it wouldn't break free. They also installed some metal bollards to also help prevent pipes from breaking loose. They've also kind of created a operational boundary around the equipment that they don't have their operators enter while the equipment's pressurized. So all really great steps taken to help mitigate risk in the future. There's also a good lesson learned for the division here in that the customer was not at all aware of the requirement to report. So we've taken that on board. We are looking into different methods of making sure our customers and contractors are aware of the requirement to report accidents and what all those requirements are. We're looking into adding it to inspector email signatures. We're looking at maybe putting an informational flyer together. So we're hoping to get more of that information out there so that we don't have to investigate things 6 months after the fact again. The last bit of information I have is much better news. At our last meeting we mentioned, and I think I briefly mentioned during the overdues update, that the boiler program has had a vacancy. We've had an inspector position open since August. Luckily, we have been able to fill that position, and our new inspector starts next Monday. So we're looking forward to that. And when we have the opportunity, maybe at the next meeting, I will introduce our new inspector to the board. But that is all I have for program update, unless you, Mr. Chair, or anyone else on the board has any questions for me.
Roger Hendricks, through the chair. Just a question on that fitting that failed. Are you able to elaborate the style of fitting, or is that still kind of a ambiguous question until more is done in the investigation through the engineer?
Thanks for the question, Roger. I'm happy to explain. The fitting was a compression fitting, often called like a shark bite fitting. I cannot remember off the top of my head the brand name of the type of fitting that failed. My understanding that there's basically three options. Is either the fitting was installed upside down or backwards, or it wasn't crimped all the way, or there was some sort of structural flaw in the fitting itself. Those are the possibilities of failure, but I do not have the data on which one of those options it turned out to be yet.
All right. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
No, thanks, Tom. If I could I back up for a second? Something just came to mind. Maybe Tyler or Tom could answer. With the task group that we are going to put together for discussing the rule change, what kind of time frame should we expect, or do we need to impose a time frame on two part, on putting it together and B, reporting back to the board?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I believe that is entirely up to the board and how it would like to proceed. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to bring this to this board meeting specifically, is to, as you mentioned, get some feedback from members of the public, as we just had, and also to discuss if the board wants to to form a work group or committee, if you will, in the first place. So I believe it's up to the discretion of the board how it wants this committee to proceed. If it wants to set parameters for BCD to assemble members or reach out to the public or to do various things like that, it's free to do so if it decides as a group to do so. And if the board's going to be appointing its own members, it's free to set its own timelines as it wishes.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything to say? I mean, I don't want it to drag out, so would it be reasonable to say, hey, let's put a task group together by next meeting, and by June have a response to the board? Does anybody have a comment to that?
Through the chair, this is Roger Hendricks. I think putting a timeline on it is very reasonable. We don't want this to drag out forever, as things often seem to do. I believe June might be fast. We may have to push it out till the next meeting past then. But I think giving 9 months to discuss this, and if the task group could get together once a month or more often as needed, I think that's quite a bit of time to hash this out.
Mr. Chair, if I can make a comment.
Yes, please.
Again, this is Tom Clark, Boiler Chief of the Division. One thing I will say is that already we have the duty to put together a committee for code adoption, and we really need to get that ball rolling. And I don't want to overwhelm the board with too many committees and options that they need to review. So at the same time, the board clearly wants to address this issue for the sake of the public. So I'll just remind the public members attending that we do have the rule for temporary extensions in place. We've issued 2 so far already since that rule's in place. And I hope that no matter how long it takes the board to review this issue, that we can use that rule to help continue your operations in the meantime. So just for you, the board, my main point is just maybe don't bite off too much at once, and we will do our best to meet whatever your needs.
Thanks for pointing that out, Tom. I tend to get a little overconfident. All right, so let's see. I lost my place. We're on to new business. So new continuing education courses and instructor applications. Tyler, would you like to go over this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, this is Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the Division. For this round of continuing education applications, we had 5 applications from 1 organization. If you notice, 1 course was recommended for approval. 4 instructors were recommended also for approval. And this will require a motion. The list is just slightly below the original memo agenda item. If you have any questions, I will happy to answer them. And again, this will require a motion.
Does anybody have any further discussion? Anybody like to give a motion?
I'll submit the motion, Mr. Chair. So I, Roger Hendricks, move to approve the committee's recommendation for approval or denial of courses or instructors.
Thank you, Roger. Debbie, would you like to Take a vote.
Mr. Chair, the BCD drop down for the meeting says that they have no audio presently.
Okay. Technology is fun.
Mr. Chair, if you'll permit me, I believe I can do a roll call and we can just take the vote that way.
That would be great, Tyler.
All right. So do we have Gregory Moyer? No, I don't believe so. Patrick Lamb? No. Kenneth Hill? No. Roger Hendricks?
Yes.
Thomas Engstrom?
Aye.
Jeff Roter?
Present.
And then I believe we also have Ryan Garvey?
Here.
And Chair Byer.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, I believe that is sufficient votes to pass the motion. But let me just double check real quick. Do we have Patrick Lamb? And or Kenneth Hill? I don't believe we do, but I believe that is sufficient votes to pass the motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tyler. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned at 10:54 a.m.